Lesson 5. Gender Roles. Ancient Greek Children. Life for the ancient Greek children varied depending on their social status, gender and family circumstances. Here are some general aspects of life for ancient Greek children. Play and recreation. Children in ancient Greece enjoyed various forms of play and recreation. They played with toys such as dolls, balls and board games. Outdoor activities like running, wrestling and horseback riding were also fun. Family life. Family was central to ancient Greek society and children were an important part of it. They lived with their parents and siblings and the father was the head of the household. Children were expected to respect and obey their parents and elders. Gender roles. Gender roles were distinct in ancient Greece. Boys were seen as future citizens and were prepared for their roles in society, while girls were primarily trained for marriage and motherhood. Boys had more freedom and opportunities for education and participation in public life. Religion and festivals. Religion played a significant role in ancient Greek life, and children participated in religious rituals and festivals. They learned about the gods and goddesses and took part in celebrations and processions. Chores and responsibilities. Children, especially from lower income families, were expected to help the household chores and tasks. This could include fetching water, or tending to animals, or assisting with cooking and cleaning. Greek girls. Life for ancient Greek girls was quite different from that of the boys. Girls in ancient Greece did not receive formal education like boys. They were primarily educated at home by their mothers or female tutors. The focus of their education was on domestic skills such as weaving, spinning, cooking and managing a household. Marriage was a significant event in the life of an ancient Greek girl. Girls were typically married off at a young age, often in their early teens, to older men chosen by their families. The primary role of a girl was to become a wife and mother, managing the household and raising children. Girls had limited freedom and were expected to be obedient and respectful to their parents and later to their husbands. They had fewer opportunities for independence and participation in public life compared to boys. Girls were expected to adhere to strict social norms and codes of conduct. They were often secluded within the household and had limited interaction with people outside their immediate family. Modesty and chastity were highly valued virtues for girls. Girls had limited legal rights and were not considered equal to boys or adult men. They could not own property, participate in legal matters, or engage in political life. Greek boys. Education was highly valued in ancient Greece, and boys from wealthy families received formal education. They were taught reading, writing, maths, music and poetry. The primary purpose of education was to prepare boys for their roles as citizens and future leaders. Physical fitness and strength were also important for ancient Greek boys. They participated in physical activities such as running, wrestling, discus throwing. Physical training was seen as a way to develop discipline, courage and endurance. Boys were expected to show discipline and respect towards their elders, especially their fathers and teachers. They were taught to obey authority and follow societal norms. Boys were encouraged to socialise with their peers and participate in communal activities. They often played games, participated in religious festivals and attended public events. These activities help boys develop social skills and build relationships with their friends. In In some city-states, boys receive military training from a young age. They learned how to handle weapons, march in formation, and engage in combat. This training prepared them for their future roles as soldiers and defenders of the city-state. Ancient Greek society had strict gender roles, and boys were raised to become responsible citizens and heads of the household. They were expected to marry, have children, and provide for their families. Boys were also taught to be physically and mentally strong, as well as uphold the values of honour and bravery. Ancient Greek women. Life for ancient Greek women varied depending on their social status in the time period. However, in general, women in ancient Greece had limited rights and were expected to fulfill specific roles within the household. The primary role of women in ancient Greece was to marry and bear children. Marriage was typically arranged by the father, and the women had little say in choosing their partners. Once married, women were expected to manage the household, raise children, and ensure the continuation of the family line. Women in ancient Greece typically wore long flowing garments called chitons. They would often cover their heads with veils when in public. Physical appearance was highly valued, and women would spend time on grooming and beautification. Pale skin was considered attractive, so women would use white lead or chalk to lighten their complexion. Women in ancient Greece had limited freedoms and were expected to remain within the confines of their own homes. They were not allowed to participate in politics or public events, and their social interactions were primarily limited to other women and family members. Women were also expected to be faithful to their husbands, while men had more freedom in their relationships. Despite these restrictions, there were exceptions to the norm. Some women from wealthy families had more freedom and can participate in public life to some extent. Additionally, women in certain city-states such as Sparta had more rights and were allowed to participate in physical activities and to own property. Ancient Greek men. Life for ancient Greek men was significantly different from that of women. Men held more rights, privileges, and responsibilities in society. Only men who were citizens of the city-state had political rights and could participate in the democratic process. They could vote in the assembly, hold public office, and serve in the military. Citizenship was typically inherited through the father, and women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from political participation. Men were expected to work and provide for their families. They engaged in various occupations, including farming, trade, craftsmanship, and military service. Some men also held positions in government or became philosophers, poets, or artists. Slaves and women often assisted men in their work, allowing them to focus on their professional pursuits. Men had more freedom to socialise and interact with others outside their households. They would gather in public spaces, such as the marketplace, to discuss politics, philosophy, and current events. They'd also participated in symposia, which were social gatherings where men could drink, eat, and engage in intellectual discussions. Men had more control over the marriage and family matters. They typically chose their own wives and held the power to divorce them. Men were also responsible for managing the household finances and making decisions regarding their children. Inheritance and property ownership was passed down through the male line. Clothing. In ancient Greece, the clothing worn by children varied depending on their age, gender, and social status. Here are some general descriptions of the clothing worn by ancient Greek children. Infants and toddlers. Infants and toddlers typically wore simple garments made of soft fabric, such as linen or wool. These garments were often loose-fitting and designed for easy movement. They were usually wrapped in swaddling clothes, which were strips of fabric used to keep the baby warm and secure. Young boys. Young boys in ancient Greece typically wore a chiton, which was a simple tunic-like garment. The chiton was made of rectangular pieces of fabric sewn together and fastened at the shoulders with pins or buttons. It was usually knee-length and allowed for freedom of movement. Boys might also wear a himation, which was a larger rectangular piece of fabric draped over one shoulder and wrapped around the body. Young girls. Young girls also wore a chiton, similar to boys, but their garments were often longer and more elaborate. Girls' chitons might have had decorative borders, pleats or embroidery. They might also have worn a himation, like boys, draped over one shoulder and wrapped around the body. Girls' clothing often was more colourful and decorative elements compared to boys. As children grew, their clothing would become more similar to adult attire. Boys would transition to wearing a shorter version of the adult male chiton, while girls would start wearing longer and more elaborate garments, often with additional layers and accessories.